Comix Zone. That's probably a name you've never heard of or haven't heard from in a while, or you only know that name because it's also the name of a comic book store. And the question I ask you is, why is that the case? Well, because this specific series only has one game to its name. SEGA never attempted at another installment, and now it's been 25 years since the original came out, and I think it's due for another installment. I legitimately think that Comix Zone should be turned into a series. So how could Comix Zone work as a series in 2021 and beyond? I'll continue watching the video to find out as we look at how Comix Zone can work in 2021. Now, just like with my video on how Vectorman can work in 2021, I'm going to talk about the game itself first, specifically in terms of story, gameplay, music, and visuals. Then I'll talk about how a Comix Zone game could work in 2021. So without wasting time, let's jump into it. Now, the story is fully explained in the Wikipedia article for the game, so I'll just read that aloud, and yeah, I'll also put it on screen if you want to read it yourself and you don't want to hear me read. Anyway. Sketch Turner, a starving artist and a freelance rock musician living in New York City, is working on his newest comic book, Comix Zone. It is the story of the New World Empire's attempt to defend Earth from an invasion of alien renegades, with inspiration coming from Sketch's oddly vivid dreams and nightmares. One night, while Sketch is working on Comix Zone during a thunderstorm, a lightning bolt strikes a panel of his comic. In this instant, its main villain, a powerful mutant named Mortis, escapes the comic book's pages, desiring to kill Sketch so he can become flesh and blood and take over the real world. Because he does not possess any power in reality, Mortis sends Sketch into the world of his own comic, freely drawing enemies in, attempting to kill him. Inside the comic book, Sketch meets General Alyssa Cyan, I think that's how you pronounce it? I don't know, who believes he is the chosen one who came to save their post-apocalyptic world from the evil of Mortis and the alien invaders. Ignoring Sketch's protests, Alyssa sends him on his mission, keeping in touch with instructions and hints via a radio. It is up to Sketch to stop Mortis' evil plans and find a way out of this comic world. The game has two possible endings. At the end of the game, Alyssa attempts to defuse a nuclear weapon that Mortis and the mutants plan on using to wipe out the New World Empire and humanity. When Mortis comes back into the comic and throws her into the chamber, which starts to fill up with liquid, Mortis then battles Sketch personally. If the player defeats Mortis and the creeps he summons, as he takes damage quickly enough to drain the liquid and save Alyssa before the nuke self-destructs, an ending occurs, where Alyssa comes to the real world with Sketch and Roadkill and joins the army, eventually becoming chief of security for the United States. Roadkill is given a vast amount of mozzarella cheese and spends a lot of time exploring the city's new sewer system when not sleeping under a pile of Sketch's dirty socks. Comix Zone becomes an instant sensation, selling out on the first day, making Sketch famous as it becomes the best-selling comic book ever. With the bad ending, defeating Mortis after the chamber fills with liquid, Alyssa dies as the nuke self-destructs. Sketch and Roadkill come out, but Sketch's comic is destroyed, leaving him devastated at having saved the New World Empire but failed to save Alyssa. So the story isn't that complicated, it's pretty simple, but creative for the 90s, and I definitely think that the story could continue. In fact, before the credits start rolling, the text above the credits states, "And they all lived happily together until..." So they kind of hint at a sequel, which unfortunately never happened, but that's the point of this video, isn't it? So let's move on to the gameplay, visuals, and music. Gameplay. As you probably already know, Comix Zone is a 2D beat-em-up game where the controls and moves you do aren't that complicated. They're pretty simple, so much so that it can get repetitive at times. You play through the game in comic book panels as you are trapped in a comic book, as mentioned when I talked about the story. The game consists of 3 episodes, basically worlds, but they call them episodes in this game, with each episode consisting of 2 pages, where secrets are discovered by shredding the paper and revealing items with Roadkill. These items include the knife, grenade, bomb, iced tea, superhero, and Turner's sidekick, Roadkill, that I just mentioned. The first 3 items I mentioned are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm only gonna read what the last 3 items do from the manual. The manual describes the iced tea as a refreshing drink that will partially restore a depleted health meter. It describes the superhero as a fist that turns Sketch into a page-ripping superhero. And finally, the manual says Roadkill. This is Sketch's pet rat. His tail got electrified during the warp to the comics is what they mean. Let him use his newfound ability to your advantage. Don't forget, Roadkill has a good sense of smell. He can often sniff out hidden goods. Now, one thing I want to say about the items is that the most useful item, which is the iced tea, is very scarce in the game. Which brings me into talking about the difficulty. Now, if you do know of this game, you probably know that it is notoriously difficult, and in many cases unfairly difficult. Some enemies have really cheap attacks, for example the flying creature or the Pelagus, and in order to progress through the pages, Sketch often has to either successfully solve a puzzle or defeat all the enemies within that panel. Once you've defeated all the enemies, arrows will appear, allowing Sketch to jump to another panel, with some areas offering multiple routes. If you play the game, you'll know what I'm talking about. To add on about the difficulty, when you die and get a game over, you start the whole game all over again. There are no lives and no checkpoints, so this only makes the difficulty worse and really shows Comix Zone's age. It really hasn't aged that well. Now, the player can gain extra chances by clearing the first and second chapters, which allows Sketch to resume from the beginning of the page should he die, but those chances are lost really fast and they only give you one chance, so it's not much. It really doesn't make the difficulty any better. But that's what we're gonna fix, right? The music in Comix Zone can be described as rock and grunge influenced, at least from what I heard. And obviously, since the Genesis and many other consoles at the time were very limited within their sound capabilities, it heavily affected Comix Zone's soundtrack, so it doesn't sound exactly like, let's say, this track. Kind of compressed by the Genesis, resulting in tracks sounding like this. But nonetheless, it's a pretty good soundtrack. The tunes are catchy and complement the game really well. Like I said before, it's heavily grunge influenced, which definitely reveals the fact that this game was definitely made in the 90s, grunge's peak. But nonetheless, very good. Comix Zone's visuals. The visuals are really good. Just like I said in my Vectorman video, games such as Comix Zone and Vectorman definitely prove why the Genesis is better than the SNES. And since the game takes place in a comic book, the game tries its best to emulate the comic book style into 16-bit graphics, and it does a pretty good job, especially for its time. The environments can also be dynamic as you do switch through different comic book panels. My favorite environment is definitely the second page of episode 2. The visuals are chef's kiss. Now that I've talked about the OG game itself, let's talk about how Comix Zone can work in 2021 and beyond. This new Comix Zone game will be in 2D just like the original. The story in this new 2D Comix Zone game can be relatively the same as the story in the original game. This new 2D Comix Zone game takes place 20 years after the original, in the year 2015. Now that Sketch Turner is rich because of the fact that his comic is the best-selling comic of all time, he doesn't have to worry about paying bills or anything of that nature, so he writes comics for fun. And for the 20th anniversary of Comix Zone, he decides to rewrite the original comic but with better resources now that he is rich and because technology has improved over time. But due to coincidence, a strange lightning storm starts and persists throughout the day, eventually striking Sketch as he is about to finish the final 2 pages of the rewritten version of Comix Zone, causing Mortis to return and escape out of the comic and trap Sketch in the comic again, this time with the intention of seeking revenge, meaning he is way more ruthless now. Once in the comic, he meets General Lissa Barca, a commander similar to Alyssa Cyan, who believes Sketch is the chosen one who came to save the post-apocalyptic world from the evil of Mortis and the alien invaders. Ignoring Sketch's protests, Lissa sends him on his mission, keeping in touch with instructions and hints via a radio. It is up to Sketch to stop Mortis' evil plans and find a way out of this comic world, but this time he'll have to work a bit harder and smarter, since he is older now and some of his skills have deteriorated and Mortis is way more ruthless. Skipping all the extra plot details, at the end of the game, Sketch defeats a harder, much more ruthless Mortis and escapes from the comic, coming back home to Alyssa, who is now his wife and also his son. Now the gameplay would be an improved version of the original game. The control scheme can be the same, obviously updated to modern controllers like the DualSense or the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. And now that there are extra buttons on the controller, a la the shoulder buttons, those can be used for new special attacks that Sketch can perform when holding specific items. Speaking of items, you can now hold 7 items instead of 3 items. The same items are kept from the original game, but new variations are added, like for example, the superhero which turns Sketch into a superhero. The variation of that could be a new item called the Super Duper Hero, which temporarily transforms Sketch into his superhero form, where his attacks pack a way bigger punch, killing some enemies instantly. Speaking of enemies, all the enemies from the previous game are kept the same. I really don't know how those enemies could change in any way, so I think those should just be kept as is, maybe adding different color variants. Now the difficulty. Obviously, like I mentioned previously, the game is known for being notoriously difficult, so this time there are options for difficulty in this new Comix Zone game. Them being easy, normal, hard, super hard, and insanely hard. So the skilled players and casuals both have a lot to get out of this game. In easy mode, enemies have lower health and cause less damage. Items like the iced tea are widely available and you can die an infinite amount of times and respawn at checkpoints. In normal mode, it's a mix of both easy and hard. Iced teas are moderately available and enemies get stronger as you go along in the game. Lives are given to you, and if you lose all your lives, you restart from the most recent checkpoint that you touched. In hard mode, the game is basically like the original. Enemies are strong and smart, useful items are scarce, and if you lose all your lives, you restart the whole game. Super hard and insanely hard are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not really gonna say anything about those. Now, one extra element I think they can add in this new hypothetical Comix Zone game is a shop, which occasionally pops up every time you complete a page. You can buy extra lives and items from the store if you've collected enough comic book shreds, which can be the currency, but the shop is not needed. It's just a bonus if some players need help. Additionally, it is available in all difficulties. I think a co-op mode would also be another good extra mode to add, where one player plays as Sketch and one player plays as Roadkill. Should cause some squaffles among younger players just for fun. And lastly, I think the amount of episodes should increase from 3 to 7, with newer levels being added, since according to my story for this new hypothetical Comix Zone game, Sketch is redoing his original comic, so it's only natural for him to want to add new content. Now the music. Now, as I stated in the first part of this video, the music was originally grunge and rock influenced, and that's not changing. The only thing that is changing is the fact that the music will not sound compressed by the Genesis hardware. Here are a few examples of how the music in the game can sound in this new hypothetical Comix Zone game. The newer tracks will also be grunge influenced with a little bit of alternative rock tracks too. Like I said before, the subgenre really complements the game itself. The music can be done by the band Roadkill, and it will probably be fire. Now, in terms of visuals, the graphical style should change from 16-bit to hand-drawn, similar to Streets of Rage 4, but more comic book-esque in some animations. The speech bubble now comes with clear voice acting when they pop up when characters talk to Sketch. Speaking of that, I think that there should be cutscenes in between episodes, illustrating what has happened at that point in the story with full voice acting, obviously with hand-drawn animation. They could get Tyson Hess to do the cutscenes. Now, what consoles would this new Comix Zone game be on? Well, everything, pretty much. The PlayStation 5, the PlayStation 4, the Xbox Series X/S, the Nintendo Switch, and PC. For PC, it would be Steam and Epic Game Store. The game could get developed by either Dotemu or Merge Games. They could both get the job done, so any of them would be fine. And if the game gets a deluxe edition, the original Comix Zone game should come with that edition as part of the extra content. And for the standard edition, the original Comix Zone can be unlocked by completing the game. And I think that sums up how I think a new Comix Zone game would work in 2021 and beyond, and I think it could still be a relevant franchise in today's gaming climate, as there are not many titles like its kind. It's pretty unique, so yeah. So thank you for watching until the end. If you have any ideas on how a Comix Zone game could work in 2021, be sure to say them down below in the comments, as I'd love to read what you all think, and be sure to leave a like if you enjoy the video and so it can get seen by more people. And at the end of the day, I am trying to get these videos seen by the folks over at SEGA, so please like and subscribe if you want to see more content from me. And yeah, anyway guys, I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.